Welcome back to Horizons of the Mind, where we explore the profound questions that have captivated human consciousness for millennia. Today we're diving into one of philosophy's most enduring and universal mysteries, death. Since the dawn of human awareness, we've gazed into the void of mortality and asked ourselves, what is death? What lies beyond? And perhaps most importantly, how should we live knowing that death is our inevitable companion? From the marble halls of ancient Athens to the contemplative chambers of medieval monasteries, from the revolutionary salons of the Enlightenment to the existential cafes of 20th century Paris, philosophers have grappled with mortality in ways that continue to shape how we understand our very existence. Today we'll journey through time to explore how some of history's greatest minds have confronted the ultimate question. We'll see how their insights might illuminate our own relationship with mortality and, paradoxically, teach us how to live more fully. If this interests you, we can create a video exploring the Islamic civilization's unique insights on death and the soul's eternal journey. If you're curious about our next video focusing on how great Islamic philosophers like Al-Ghazali, Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, and others viewed death and what comes after, just let us know in the comments. Let's begin where Western philosophy itself began, in ancient Greece, where the very act of questioning death came a sacred pursuit. Socrates, the fearless inquirer. Picture this, Athens, 399 BCE. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, stands before his judges, sentenced to drink the hemlock. Yet instead of pleading for his life, he delivers one of history's most profound meditations on death. For Socrates, death was the ultimate unknown. But rather than finding this terrifying, he found it liberating. Death, he argued, is either like a dreamless sleep or a journey to another place where I can question Homer, Hesiod, and all the great souls who have gone before. Think about that for a moment. Socrates saw death not as an ending, but as either perfect peace or the ultimate philosophical adventure. His fearlessness in the face of mortality wasn't born from certainty, but from the philosopher's greatest virtue, the courage to embrace the unknown. Plato, the soul's eternal journey. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, took this inquiry even deeper. For Plato, death wasn't the end of the story, it was barely even a chapter break. He envisioned the soul as immortal, temporarily housed in the prison of the body. In his dialogue Phaedo, Plato presents death as liberation, the moment when the soul breaks free from physical constraints and returns to the realm of eternal forms. But here's what's fascinating. Plato didn't see this as a one-time event. Through his theory of reincarnation, he suggested that death and birth are part of an endless cycle, each life a chance for the soul to learn and grow. This wasn't just abstract theory for Plato. It was a call to live philosophically, to prepare the soul for its eternal journey by pursuing wisdom, justice, and beauty. Aristotle, the naturalist perspective. But not everyone in ancient Greece agreed. Aristotle, Plato's student, brought a more grounded perspective. For him, the soul and body were inseparable, like the shape of a wax seal and the wax itself. However, Aristotle's view was more nuanced than a simple soul dies with body formula. While he believed that most aspects of the soul, those tied to bodily functions, are indeed mortal, he left open the possibility that the rational aspect of the soul, what he called nous or intellect, might have a different relationship with mortality. This might sound pessimistic, but Aristotle found meaning in mortality's finality. Death for him was simply the natural conclusion of life, like the final act of a well-written play. What mattered wasn't living forever, but living well while we're here. Epicurus, the art of not fearing. And then there's Epicurus, whose approach to death might surprise you. This philosopher, often misunderstood as a hedonist, actually offered one of history's most practical philosophies of mortality. Death, Epicurus declared, is nothing to us. His reasoning was elegantly simple. All good and evil lie in sensation, and death is the absence of sensation. We don't suffer before we're born, so why should we fear returning to that same state? This wasn't callousness, it was compassion. Epicurus wanted to free people from the paralyzing fear of death so they could focus on what truly matters, living peacefully and finding genuine pleasure in friendship, knowledge, and simple joys. As we move into the medieval period, we encounter a fascinating transformation. The ancient world's philosophical inquiries about death didn't disappear. They evolved, merging with new spiritual insights. Augustine, the weight of mortality. Augustine of Hippo brought a deeply personal dimension to death philosophy. Having lived through the collapse of the Roman world and his own spiritual transformation, Augustine saw death as both humanity's greatest tragedy and its greatest teacher. For Augustine, death entered the world through human rebellion against the divine order. But here's the profound part. This wasn't just punishment, it was pedagogy. Death teaches us our dependence on something greater than ourselves and points us toward ultimate redemption. Augustine's Confessions reveals a man who found in mortality not despair, but urgency. Knowing that our time is limited, he argued, should drive us toward the eternal truths that transcend death. Thomas Aquinas, bridging two worlds. Thomas Aquinas faced a fascinating challenge: how to reconcile Aristotle's naturalistic view of death with Christian teachings about eternal life. His solution was ingenious. Aquinas agreed with Aristotle that the soul is the form of the body, they are naturally united, but he argued that the rational soul, the part of us that thinks and chooses, has a unique relationship with eternity. While the body dies, this rational aspect of the soul continues, waiting for the resurrection when body and soul will be reunited in their complete form. This wasn't just theological speculation. Aquinas was addressing a fundamental human intuition. We are both physical and spiritual beings, and any complete understanding of death must account for both dimensions. The modern period brought new tools of inquiry and new challenges to traditional thinking about death. Descartes, the divided self. René Descartes, with his famous "I think, therefore I am," fundamentally changed how we think about the relationship between mind and body. For Descartes, the thinking self, the res cogitans, was entirely separate from the physical body. This had radical implications for death. If mind and body are truly separate, then the death of the body doesn't necessarily mean the death of the mind. Descartes found in this division both the possibility of immortality and the foundation for a scientific study of physical death. Spinoza, the eternal perspective. Baruch Spinoza offered a remarkably different vision. For him, everything, including human beings, was part of one infinite substance he called Gott, or nature. From this perspective, individual death involves the dissolution of our particular mode of being, but Spinoza taught that the rational aspect of our minds participates in God's eternal intellect. This wasn't simple dissolution into nothingness. Spinoza argued that insofar as our minds contain eternal truths and rational understanding, something of us persists in the eternal structure of reality. He found in this vision not meaninglessness, but liberation from the fear of death and the foundation for what he called intellectual love of God, a joyous acceptance of our role in the cosmic order. Kant, the limits of knowledge. Immanuel Kant brought critical rigor to death philosophy. He argued that human reason, powerful as it is, simply cannot penetrate the mystery of what happens after death. This wasn't skepticism for its own sake. It was an attempt to clear space for faith and moral action. For Kant, the important question wasn't whether we survive death, but how we should live, knowing that mortality gives our choices ultimate significance. The categorical imperative, his famous moral principle, gains its power precisely because we are finite beings whose actions matter. The modern and contemporary periods have brought new urgency to death philosophy, often in response to historical catastrophes and cultural upheavals. Nietzsche, death as life's teacher. Friedrich Nietzsche, often misrepresented as a nihilistic prophet of despair, actually offered a profoundly life-affirming philosophy of death. His concept of eternal recurrence serves as a powerful thought experiment that challenged us to live as if we would have to repeat every moment of our lives forever. This thought experiment, and it's important to note that many scholars view eternal recurrence not as a metaphysical claim, but as an ethical challenge, transforms how we approach mortality. If you had to live your exact life infinite times, would you change how you're living now? Nietzsche used this hypothetical scenario and the reality of death to call us toward authentic existence, living so fully that we could embrace even our mortality. Heidegger, being toward death in Martin. Heidegger made mortality central to authentic existence. His concept of sein zum Tode, being toward death, suggested that truly understanding our mortality is what separates authentic living from mere existence. For Heidegger, most of us live in what he called the they self, following social conventions and avoiding deep questions. But confronting our own mortality, really grappling with the fact that we will die, can wake us up to authentic choices and genuine existence. This isn't morbid preoccupation. It's recognizing that death gives weight and meaning to our decisions. When we truly internalize our mortality, we stop living on autopilot and start making conscious choices about who we want to be. Sartre and Camus. Read them in the face of absurdity. Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, writing in the shadow of two world wars, brought existential intensity to death philosophy. For Sartre, death represented the ultimate boundary of human freedom. We are condemned to be free, as he put it, and mortality gives this freedom its urgency. Every choice matters because we have limited time to create meaning through our actions. Camus took this insight in a different direction. He saw death as part of life's fundamental absurdity, the disconnect between human need for meaning and the universe's apparent silence. But rather than finding this depressing, Camus saw it as liberating. If life is absurd, then we're free to create our own meaning and live with passionate intensity. His famous image of Sisyphus, eternally pushing a boulder up a mountain, becomes a metaphor for human existence. We must imagine Sisyphus happy, Camus argued, because the struggle itself, not some final victory, is where we find meaning. As we've journeyed through these philosophical perspectives, certain themes emerge that transcend cultural and historical boundaries. First, the universality of the question itself. From ancient Athens to modern Paris, from Christian monasteries to secular universities, human beings have found in mortality both their greatest fear and their most profound teacher. Second, the paradox that contemplating death often leads to deeper appreciation of life. Whether through Socrates' fearless curiosity, Augustine's urgent spirituality, or Camus' passionate engagement with absurdity, philosophers have found that facing mortality honestly can liberate us from trivial concerns and point us toward what truly matters. Third, the recognition that death gives weight to our choices. Whether we believe in afterlife, reincarnation, or final extinction, the fact of mortality means that how we live matters. Our time is limited, and this limitation gives significance to how we spend it. Finally, the insight that philosophy itself might be, as Cicero suggested, a preparation for death, not because it teaches us to die, but because it teaches us to live with wisdom, courage, and authenticity. The philosophy of death isn't a solved problem. It's an ongoing conversation that each generation must join anew. As we face new challenges, medical advances that extend life, digital technologies that promise virtual immortality, ecological crises that threaten our species' survival, we need the wisdom of these great thinkers more than ever. But we also need to add our own voices to this ancient conversation. What does mortality mean in the 21st century? How should we live knowing what we now know about the universe, consciousness, and human nature? These aren't just academic questions. They're the most practical inquiries we can make. Because in the end, how we think about death shapes how we live, love, and find meaning in our brief time under the stars. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the philosophy of death. If this exploration resonated with you, please subscribe to Horizons of the Mind, where we continue to explore the profound questions that shape human existence. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, it's precisely because our time is limited that it's so precious. What are your thoughts on how we should approach mortality? Share your perspectives in the comments below, and let's continue this eternal conversation together.